Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast, African American Books Edition. Today we are looking at To Be a Problem, A Black Woman's Survival in the Racist Disability Rights Movement by Dara Baldwin. We thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. And just to state clearly, right at the top, after hearing this podcast, we would encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author. Also, a quick disclaimer before we get started. The voices you are hearing come from AI, but the content comes straight from the book. We feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history. Now let's get into this, because when we talk about civil rights history in America, we usually like to organize things into these, very neat, polite categories. You have the struggle for racial justice over here, women's rights over there, and disability rights in a third box.
Right. And we tend to assume they're all effectively on the same team.
Exactly, fighting the same fight.
It's a comforting narrative, for sure. We like to imagine United Nations of activism where all these groups, hold hands and march together. But the reality is, it's far messier and often much more combative.
And that is exactly where Dara Baldwin comes in. This book, it essentially takes a sledgehammer to that whole happy family narrative.
Yeah.
She is taking us inside the Washington, D.C. policy machine to argue that the disability rights movement, the one responsible for ramps and the ADA, is structurally flawed.
And not just flawed, she argues it was built by white people, for white people, and that it actively erases and harms Black disabled people.
It's a heavy critique.
Oh, it's huge. She isn't just saying there are a few bad apples, she's identifying a systemic rot. Baldwin posits this fundamental tension between disability rights, which she sees as a movement obsessed with litigation and legislation, and disability justice.
And that's a whole other thing.
A whole other thing, yeah.
Yep.
Which centers the survival of Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
And the perspective she brings is so unique because Baldwin herself is a Black woman who is not disabled, yet she has spent decades in the trenches of disability policy.
That's a crucial distinction to make early on. She really frames herself as an accomplice. She's in the room, she's doing the work, but she is looking at the movement through the specific lens of Black survival.
So she sees things others just don't.
Things they completely miss because, they are protected by their privilege.
Let's talk about who Dara Baldwin is for a moment, because reading this, you get the distinct impression that she is not someone who is ever going to sit quietly in the back of the room.
Not even a little bit. And that fire was there early. There is this story she tells about her fourth grade year that, it really sets the stage for her entire career.
Oh, this was at the parochial school.
Yes, and her teacher, a nun, sent home a report card with a note that was, it was telling.
I remember this. The note didn't say she was failing math or anything. It was about her personality.
The nun wrote, "Dara has no fear. This could be a problem for her in the future. We may want to work on extinguishing this type of behavior."
Extinguishing. Wow. That is such a violent word choice for a child.
It is. It's not managing or guiding. It sounds like they wanted to put out a fire. It's the language of control.
Yeah.
The institution was looking at this Black girl who refused to be intimidated, and they saw a threat. But this is where her mother, Lillian Baldwin, comes in. She did not accept that.
No.
She marched into the school and told the staff, "You worry about educating her, I will worry about socializing her."
That is a masterclass in parenting. It's basically saying, I will not let you braid her spirit just to make her convenient for you.
Exactly. And you have to look at her lineage. Her mother was a union activist who lied about her age to march in Selma in 1965.
Incredible.
And her father was in law enforcement, the security side of things. So she grew up in a house that understood how systems work and how to organize against them.
Which brings us to the title, To Be a Problem. It feels like a badge of honor in that context, but it's also a heavy historical reference.
It connects directly to W.E.B. Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk. He famously asked, "How does it feel to be a problem?" referring to the Black experience in America.
And she's applying that to this world.
She's remixing it for the modern policy world. When she enters these white-dominated disability spaces and brings up race or challenges their strategies, she becomes the problem.
So by pointing out the racism in the room, she becomes the issue they want to manage.
Just like that nun.
Yeah, just like the nun wanted to manage her fearlessness.
Precisely. She describes being the only Black person in high-level coalition meetings for over a decade. And when you are the only one and you refuse to, assimilate or stay silent, the group dynamic shifts. She describes the DC disability community as insular, elitist, and covertly racist.
You want her labor, but they don't want her perspective.
That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, before we go further into the politics, we need to clarify some terms. This book is, I mean, it's a masterclass in social justice vocabulary, but she uses these words very specifically. We touched on it, but can we break down the difference between disability rights and disability justice? I feel like most people use them interchangeably.
Most people do, but in this book, they are basically opposing forces. Disability rights is the traditional movement. Think of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It relies on the legal system.
Okay.
It focuses on access like ramps, braille, interpreters. It's about fitting into the current world.
So that's the right side. What is justice?
Disability justice was a framework created in 2005 by BIPOC activists, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, specifically because the rights movement it left them behind.
Right.
Disability justice isn't just about laws, it's about collective liberation. It says you can't stop ableism unless you also dismantle racism, capitalism, sexism. It's holistic.
So rights is asking for a seat at the table, and justice is asking why the table was built that way in the first place.
That is a great way to put it, yeah.
She also uses the term misogynoir quite a bit.
Yes, that's a term coined by Moya Bailey. It describes the specific intersection of anti-Blackness and misogyny. Baldwin argues that Black disabled women face this unique type of erasure and hostility that, white women or Black men don't experience in the same way.
And speaking of erasure, she talks about whitewashing. And she doesn't just mean like casting white actors in movies.
No. She means the systematic removal of Black and brown people from the history books of the movement. She argues that the disability rights movement tells a story where white people are the saviors and heroes, completely ignoring the BIPOC activists who were crucial.
There is one example of this that really floored me. It's about the Olmstead decision. This is a huge Supreme Court case, right?
Massive. Olmstead VLC is often called the Brown v. Board of Education of the disability movement. It established that people have a civil right to live in their communities, not locked away in institutions. But think about the name. The Olmstead decision.
Wait, who was Olmstead?
Tommy Olmstead was the commissioner of the Georgia Department of Human Resources.
So?
He was the white man fighting to keep the women locked up.
You're kidding. They named their biggest victory after the villain of the story.
It's more than irony. Baldwin calls it erasure. The LC in the case name stands for Lois Curtis. She was a Black woman with intellectual and developmental disabilities, an artist. She was the one who fought for her freedom. But the movement talks about Olmstead constantly, while Lois Curtis is often just a footnote.
That's unbelievable. It really highlights who the movement thinks is important.
It tells you everything, doesn't it? And Baldwin traces this history of control way back. She brings up the ugly laws from the 1860s.
Ugly laws. Those sound like something from a dystopian novel.
They were terrifyingly real. Starting in San Francisco in 1865, cities passed laws making it illegal for any person who was diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed to expose themselves to public view.
So if you had a visible disability, you could be arrested just for walking down the street.
Yes. And Baldwin draws a direct line from those laws to the present day. We went from the ugly laws to the Architectural Barriers Act of '68.
It gave us ramps.
Right. Then the Rehab Act of '73, and finally the ADA in 1990. But she makes a critical distinction here between access and civil rights.
Unpack that for me. Because if I have a ramp, I have access, right?
You have physical access. But Baldwin says you can have a ramp to get into the classroom, but the professor can still kick you out.
Okay, I see.
Access gets you in the building. Civil rights keep you safe once you are inside. And she argues the white-led movement is obsessed with the ramp, but ignores the civil rights violations that threaten Black bodies, like police violence.
That is a powerful reframing. It's easy to measure a ramp. It's much harder to measure dignity.
And this friction brings us to what I think is the most heated section of the book.
Oh, this part was intense.
Yeah. Baldwin calls out the offensive comparisons that white activists use to gain sympathy. She calls it covert racism.
The biggest example has to be the Underground Railroad one.
Oh, for sure. White activists will often compare the work of moving people out of nursing homes to the Underground Railroad.
Which implies that a nursing home is the same thing as chattel slavery.
Right. And Baldwin just shuts that down immediately. She calls it a horrific act of misogynoir. She says it disrespects the ancestors, it trivializes the unique horror of the slave trade.
It's stealing Black trauma.
It's stealing Black trauma to make a political point for white people.
She also mentions the Rosa Parks comparison.
Yes, a prominent white activist introduced Yoshiko Dart, a legendary Japanese-American activist, as the Rosa Parks of the disability movement.
That just feels so lazy.
It's so reductive. It flattens Yoshiko Dart's specific heritage and contributions, and it turns Rosa Parks into a prop. It erases the complexity of both women.
And then there was the Capitol crawl.
The one that really angers her is the comparison between the Capitol crawl and Bloody Sunday.
For those who don't know, the Capitol crawl was when disabled activists crawled up the steps of the U.S. Capitol in 1990 to demand the ADA. It's a very famous image.
It is. It was a powerful, planned media event. But Baldwin points out, no one was beaten. No one was tear-gassed. No one died.
Unlike Selma.
Exactly. Compare that to Bloody Sunday, where state troopers fractured skulls. When the disability movement tries to equate those two events, they are sanitizing the violence of racism.
It feels like she's describing a hierarchy within the activism world itself.
She explicitly calls it a caste system. She argues that white disabled people still benefit from white privilege. They function from a higher caste. They want the civil rights protections, but they don't want to give up the power that comes with whiteness.
And this plays out in the actual politics of D.C. too. The Beltway section of the book is fascinating.
It's a club. She critiques the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, or CCD. This is the big power player coalition. And Baldwin points out that for a long time, to be a voting member, you had to have a physical office in Washington, D.C.
Which effectively prices out almost every grassroots group, especially those run by people of color.
Exactly. It kept the power concentrated in the hands of the wealthy, well-funded, mostly white organizations. But Baldwin found a workaround. She calls herself the Network Queen.
I love that title. How does she bypass them?
Social media. Back in 2010, the old guard white leadership thought Twitter was a joke. They laughed at it.
Right.
But Baldwin saw it as a tool for democratization. She used it to build relationships with people in Kansas, Alabama, California, people who couldn't afford a D.C. office but had stories to tell.
So she built her own network.
She built power horizontally while the CCD was hoarding it vertically.
But even with that network, the betrayals still happen. There's a section about the Dirty Dozen that I found really disturbing. And this wasn't about Republicans.
This is a harsh lesson in political reality. In 2018, there was a bill called H.R. 620. The business lobby wanted to weaken the ADA. Specifically, they wanted a notification period. So if a business wasn't accessible, you couldn't just sue them. You had to notify them and give them months to fix it.
Which removes the incentive to follow the law in the first place. It's like saying you can speed, and you only have to slow down if a cop asks you nicely.
Exactly. It turns a civil right into a negotiation. And Baldwin points out that 12 Democrats people who claim to be allies voted for it. She calls them the Dirty Dozen.
Wow.
It proved to her that political labels like progressive don't guarantee safety.
She also talks about the Ralph Northam scandal in Virginia, the governor caught in that blackface yearbook photo controversy.
That was a pivotal moment. Almost every civil rights group condemned him. But the Disability Council of the DNC?
Nothing.
Silent. Baldwin argues they stayed quiet because they wanted to protect their access to power. They chose their political connections over solidarity with black people.
So if the table is broken and the allies aren't reliable and the history is whitewashed, where does that leave us? Because the book is about survival. How do you survive that?
Baldwin's conclusion is radical. She stops trying to fix the old system. She invokes Audre Lorde. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. She is calling for a new world order.
That phrase usually sounds like a conspiracy theory, but for her, it sounds like a necessity.
It is. She is rejecting the whitewash agenda of access. She says we need to stop focusing solely on ramps and start focusing on the things that are actually killing black disabled people.
Like police violence.
Police violence, the school-to-prison pipeline, the lack of health care in black communities.
So instead of a disability rights movement that occasionally mentions race, she wants a movement that starts with the most marginalized.
Yes. The theory is the trickle-up effect of justice. If you build a world that is safe and just for a black disabled woman who sits at the intersection of racism, sexism, and ableism, you have by default built a world that is safe for everyone.
And her personal takeaway from all this, how does she keep going?
Authenticity. She refuses to code switch. She refuses to shrink herself to make white people comfortable. Her advice is never change who you are. She found that her true power didn't come from the CCD or the DNC. It came from building valid, trusting relationships with other marginalized groups.
So she stopped banging on the door of the master's house.
And started building her own shelter.
That is such a vital message. It challenges us to look at every movement we support and ask, who is writing the history? Who is being celebrated? And who is still waiting outside?
And importantly, are we fighting for access to a broken system, or are we fighting to build a new system where survival is actually possible for everyone?
That is the question we all need to sit with. If this conversation sparks something in you, we strongly encourage you to go out and purchase To Be a Problem by Dara Baldwin. Supporting the author is the absolute best way to ensure these stories continue to be told, and this essential work continues. Please subscribe to this podcast and tell a friend about us. Word of mouth is how we grow, and we really want to hear from you. If there are other books you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please drop your suggestions in the comments section. Thank you for subscribing and listening. We appreciate you, and we'll catch you next time.